Welcome, fellow adventurers, to a journey that promises to ignite your spirit of exploration and connect you with the raw beauty of nature. In this captivating episode, we will embark on an expedition along the iconic Pennine Way, Britain's premier long-distance footpath that winds through some of England's most captivating and untamed landscapes. Join us as we forge a path through 268 miles of ever-changing scenery and challenging terrain. However, I'm not stupid enough to spend 2 weeks trekking through mud and mist. Instead, it will be my older brother Tim who will be doing the walking and on-the-spot cameraman, while I take on the role of director and second camera unit. In return, he gets to fulfill a challenge he's desired since his teenage years, and complete with a camper van and dry clothes at the end of each day. Unlike other videos on the Pennine Way, this will be the complete journey, encompassing the fells and dales, the highs, the lows, the mud and the blisters, and the sights along the 268-mile path. Additionally, I want to explore the history of this trail and the very notion of long-distance walking. Why would anyone choose to endure 2 weeks of discomfort? The first section is unsurprisingly well covered by other YouTubers, especially given its proximity to Manchester, Sheffield and Leeds. In light of the rather misty conditions, I'll instead focus on the history of the Pennine Way. Regarding this initial part and historical context, I should mention that the Peak District isn't named after the pointy bits on top of the hills, but supposedly after a local tribe of Anglo-Saxons who colonised the area, known as Pennines. The Pennine Way officially opened in 1965, but its inception started over 30 years earlier on these very same hills. In Victorian times, rambling became increasingly popular as a means to escape the crime of the cities. Railways provided a convenient means of escape, and it's no coincidence that the Pennine Way starts a short distance from Edale train station, with the line opening up in 1894. The Peak District is surrounded by industrial cities, and at the close of the Victorian era, the hills were a popular destination for walkers. However, landowners who used the moors for grouse shooting closed the fells to the public. After World War I, the demand for countryside access grew. In 1930, the Youth Hostling Association was founded, run by volunteers to provide young and working people with affordable accommodation. In 1931, the National Council of Ramblers of Federations was established to campaign for the interests of walkers and access to the hills. The following year, some of the more left-wing individuals, frustrated by the lack of ambition of the Ramblers, organised a mass trespass of Kinder Scout. 400 to 800 protesters ventured into the hills and were met by the Duke of Devonshire's gamekeepers and police. Violent scuffles ensued, resulting in 5 arrests, albeit not for trespass, which remains a civil issue. Instead, the arrests were made on charges of public order offences. The journey towards access to the countryside has been a gradual political process. As early as 1884, an Access to the Mountain Act was proposed, and again in 1908. However, it wasn't until 1939 that a much watered-down bill was passed, and an act to create national parks was finally implemented in 1949, and the Peak District becoming the first national park in England. Now, in England, a limited right to roam on open moor and mountains was introduced by Labour in 2000, whilst in Scotland, a full right to roam was established by law in 2003. Access to our common heritage is undoubtedly essential. However, the question arises, what's more desirable, thousands of shorter trails or one long one? The idea of the Pennine Way was initially proposed in a newspaper article by Tom Stevenson in 1935. He would later become the author of the official guidebook in 1969. It's clear that Stevenson drew inspiration from the United States Appalachian Trail, which spans an impressive 2,200 miles, and conceived by Benton McKay in 1921. The Appalachian Trail was a visionary project in regional planning. Its unique selling point was the idea of cooperation and unity between states and communities it traversed. And it's truly an epic trail through an epic landscape, extending all the way from Maine to Georgia. And with the support of national parks, the first section of the trail was completed in 1923. In contrast to Britain, the United States had established national parks as early as 1872 and had 15 of them by the 1920s, while the UK commissioned its first national park, the Peak District, only in 1951. Tom Stevenson's activism not only contributed to the creation of national parks in the UK, but also to the realisation of the Pennine Way itself. In 1948, volunteers had meticulously mapped out the route for the Pennine Way. Much of this route comprised of existing or presumed rights of way, and these included old Roman roads and miners' tracks, totaling 180 miles. However, an additional 70 miles of new footpaths had to be negotiated. Tom Stevenson assumed the role of president of the Ramblers in 1948, and he had the fortunate opportunity to influence the revolutionary post-war Labour government. This government was responsible for establishing significant institutions like the National Health Service, but also national parks and improving the rights of access. Since other long-distance paths have followed, although they're shorter, the Ridgeway and the South Downs Way, both created in 1972, follow very ancient trackways. The North Down Way follows the route of pilgrims, and both Offa's Dyke and Hadrian's Wall follow a path laid out by kings and emperors. The Pennine Way is different. It is the creation of working people for working people. A distinctive feature of British life, particularly in the industrial North and Midlands, was the factory holiday, or trades fortnight. This tradition, which has its roots in medieval wakes, originally religious holidays, provided factories often operating around the clock with a pause to service their machinery. Different industries would stagger their holidays to avoid clashes. For instance, the Staffordshire potteries had their Potter's Holiday in July, carefully scheduled not to coincide with Leicestershire's industries or the mills of Manchester. Paid holiday leave didn't become a reality until 1938, and it was only for a single week. Nevertheless, people saved diligently for their holidays. Londoners, for instance, had working holidays picking hops or fruit in Kent. Some would head to seaside towns. But those seeking adventure, the Pennine Way offered an exciting expedition right on their doorstep, and achievable within the 2-week window. It represented a frontier spirit nestled between the built-up regions of northern England, amid the urban sprawl of Greater Manchester and Yorkshire conurbations. Completing the Pennine Way became a badge of honour, affording bragging rights among workmates upon achievement. At its zenith, around 15,000 walkers completed the trail annually. However, that number has now dwindled down to less than 2,000. It's important to acknowledge that the entire Pennine Way cannot be condensed down into a 1-hour video, and the views that capture Tim's attention may differ from what I would film. As a dedicated walker, Tim's primary concern revolves around conditions of the path and staying on the right track. The state of the signage and footpaths can vary significantly, and this responsibility typically falls under the jurisdiction of local highways authorities, usually managed by the county council. Given that the route spans several counties, something as fundamental as signage quality fluctuates from good to poor. Natural England, Department of DEFRA, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, is meant to coordinate these local authorities through national trails, so as to ensure the maintenance of these footpaths. However, it appears that this coordination has its challenges, in part because of Natural England's limited budget and wide-ranging responsibilities. Interestingly, the most challenging aspect of the Pennine Way isn't necessarily the topography. At the highest point on the route, it reaches a mere 865 metres in the Pennines. Well, they're not mountains, they're hills of significance, and the terrain often comprises of bogs and can be physically demanding. The concept of a north-south divide in England is well known, but where does the north start and the south end? If one to look for a dividing line, it could be found here between Sheffield and Manchester in the Peak District. And this distinction isn't solely due to the fact that Ned Stark, portrayed by Sean Bean, hails from Sheffield. Although this area is just a bit north of the Midlands, it undeniably carries the feel of the north. The Pennine Way was primarily designed as a long-distance trail, with the main goal being to connect existing rights-of-way rather than creating a sightseeing route. There are some noteworthy exceptions, such as Stoodley Pike Monument, which commemorates the defeat of Napoleon. This is the monument's second recreation, as the original, built in 1815, collapsed in 1854. It's worth noting that the monument has 39 steps, and nothing to do with the film of the same name.
Definitely need a torch, don't you?
I don't know what's more difficult, to walk up here or to walk up to...
Yeah.
Here in the Peak District, we depart from the south and head across moorland that separates Yorkshire and Lancashire. The Pennine Way takes a slight eastern detour from Hebden Bridge, which is certainly a worthwhile visit, especially if you're in need of refreshments and provisions. Hebden Bridge is nestled in the valley that connects Burnley and Rochdale in the west with Halifax, Bradford and Leeds to the east. The valley skillfully accommodates a road, canal, a rail link between these conurbations, along with the River Calder and Hebden waters. With an influx of creatives and New Age individuals, Hebden Bridge is often considered the Glastonbury of the North. Tim is, let's say, a water engineer and could give an in-depth commentary on these waterworks, which I will perhaps save for a future video on the secrets of sewage. Do comment if you think it would make for a good subject. Many sites of interest along the route are bypassed because the journey through moorland makes detours impractical. Tim's approach to filming is candid. He captures what's in front of him. In contrast, I take a different approach, acting as an unpaid promoter of tourism in England, seeking out the most stunning landscapes and filming them on sunny or more atmospheric days. It's worth noting that television programmes, such as the BBC's 50-year anniversary programme of the Pennine Way, featured a wide range of activities and themes, which included whitewater rafting, archaeology, and even a Roman dig. Similarly, the Channel 5 series on the Pennines, with reference to the Pennine Way, has explored topics like clog making and glamping. There is not much content which actually deals with the trail. Going back to the 1970s, on the 10-year anniversary of the Pennine Way, the BBC's nationwide programme had one of its presenters walk the entire route and provide 5-minute video diaries for each day. I distinctly remember him crossing over the newly opened Trans-Pennine M62. It's intriguing how childhood memories tend to be rather selective. The Yorkshire Dales stand out as one of the highlights on the route. This limestone karst landscape feels otherworldly and spectacular. It's even been used as a filming location for movies such as Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, and the post-cataclysmic, low-budget 1989 sci-fi film featuring Mark Hamill, Slipstream. There is a version kicking around on YouTube if you are so inclined. I quite liked it. Mullen Cove, sculptured by water in a post-glacial landscape, once boasted a waterfall. However, the stream has now found its way underground through the porous limestone, re-emerging at the base. The geology of the Pennine Way, while not necessarily riveting, is interesting. The peaks, Yorkshire Dales and Pennine Hills, were once part of a geological depression approximately 350 million years ago in the Carboniferous period. That was a time of coal seams and tropical boggy forests, with this area initially being a shallow sea. The underlying limestone formed from calcium-rich mud and the shells of sea creatures. Back then, Britain was part of the supercontinent Pangaea and located near the equator. As the shallow sea was gradually elevated above sea level, vast rivers carried sediment to create extensive mudflats of massive delta, similar to what the Ganges River's delta looked like today. Over time, shell developed above the limestone, which was in turn covered by sandy silt, and we recognise that as gritstone, and it's used for making grinding stones for flour. In the vast expanse of time that followed, as the hills were pushed up around 100 million years ago in the Cretaceous period, the gritstone and the shells eroded in certain areas, revealing ancient limestone beneath. The alkaline soils of this region are fertile and make for excellent farming, and it creates a vivid contrast from the acidic moors that characterise the rest of the landscape.
Very nice. So what advice would I give to anybody planning to do the Pennine Way? First, check your sanity. But it is a walk you can adjust to your own. I mean, I think the fastest must have been a squaddy. It was about 76 hours. I don't think any normal person would do that. I'm trying to squeeze it into 2 weeks and it's a little bit hard. That is taking its toll. the guidebook I've got recommends 3 weeks, so, and I think to enjoy it, yeah, that's probably right. It's also, the guidebook sort of suggests a 2 mile an hour sort of walking pace, which sounds very pessimistic, but actually I think it's the truth. You know, the terrain and general tiredness, that's gonna be the average sort of time, maybe a little bit, but you're not gonna gain much. That's perhaps one of my mistakes, but I sort of said, oh, 8 miles for a stage, and in fact maybe, you know, let's make it 20, and 20 miles is grueling, and I've ended up doing 12 hours to get those 20 miles in. Surprisingly, apart from my feet, the rest of my body's not really affected, the rest of my body, but there we are. So I think if you've got the time, take 3 weeks. So it's been asked, why am I doing this? Well, especially on a day like this. Why am I doing it on a day like this? Well, it's a long story. Okay. So the going may be fairly easy now, but the Pennine Way is definitely a tough challenge. There's some really tough terrain out there. Boulders, boulder fields, bogs, they all take their toll. A trail that's not particularly well marked in places, and so it is tough. And the question is, why would I want to do it? Well, I found it a lot tougher than I thought it was going to be. This is no stroll, and but it goes back, I don't know, something caught my imagination when I was 14 and I went out and bought a book on the Pennine Way. 50 years later, here I am doing it. I should have done it 30 years ago at least, but anyway, why? Well, I hate the phrase bucket list, but if I hadn't done this one, I think I would have regretted it. So there we are. I mean, someone else said because it's there, and that's another reason. And it's had its moments, but it's been more tough, especially with the blisters. Yeah.
This August, the weather has been unseasonably wet, and this summer has turned out to be a washout, with only the occasional summer's day. It's often said that Eskimos have 300 words for snow, and it feels like the British may have as many words for rain. Tim has had the opportunity to experience most of them during this trip. When it comes to the weather, Tim has pointed out that the glorious sunshine would have meant sweating and heat, and the need to stay hydrated, and being plagued by insects. So there's some advantage to less clement weather. Travelling in winter months would present serious hazards, as people have died of exposure on these hills. However, in summer the risks are minimal and the days are long. The poor signage along the route is more of a hindrance than a hazard, as there's a mobile signal coverage for most of the route, making navigation using your phone adequate. The most significant weather-related issue is if you choose to camp. Going to bed and waking up in damp clothes may not be a health hazard, but it can certainly impact your enjoyment. While youth hosteling options are limited, there are plenty of independent lodgings available, ranging from glamping to staying in a fancy garden shed, although the cost can add up over 2 or 3 weeks. The best option might be to have somebody waiting at the end of each leg with a cosy camper van and dry clothes, and a hot meal and a packed lunch ready for the next day. No need to thank me, Tim. Following the River Tees to high force, one encounters one of the largest waterfalls in England, in terms of volume of water. It's interesting to note that Force is the Viking name for waterfall, and it adds an intriguing layer of meaning to terms like forceful and even police force. Other Viking terms are torrent, which means stream, dale for the valleys, and fell for hills or mountains. If you want to visit High Force, for visitors travelling by car, there's an admission fee to the local estate, which is £5 for parking and £1.50 per visitor. However, there is the option to walk up from a free car park a few miles away, and no admission fee. The ancient geology of the Pennine Way is characterised by Carboniferous gritstone and limestone. It's punctuated by the presence of the windsill. These are the rocks that High Force cascades over. This geological feature formed at the end of the Carboniferous period and the beginning of the Permian, approximately 300 million years ago. During this period, Scotland and England started to undergo tectonic activity, causing the crust to thin and allow magma to rise, but not break to the surface, creating a sill. This magma solidified between the layers of Carboniferous sedimentary rocks, eventually cooling to form a type of rock that erodes into these dramatic cliffs. The same geological formation can be observed a few miles north on the Pennine Way at the spectacular and more remote Cauldron Snout, as well as 35 miles north along the Hadrian's Wall, which is also on the route.
Now you can see what people are going about it.
Oh yeah.
Just pleased that it's clear enough that we can.
They had mountain. There's a sort of calculation that you do.
Good for age.
Yeah. So, no. Well,
Despite the popularity of long-distance trails, it's interesting to note the limited presence of such trails in popular culture. A notable exception is Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, a literary masterpiece from over 6 centuries ago, which features a collection of 24 tales told by travellers on a pilgrimage from London to Canterbury. Since then, there's been relatively few dramatisations of long-distance trails. For example, the 2010 film The Way follows a bereaved father, played by Martin Sheen, as he walks the El Camino de Santiago, a 500-mile route across northern Spain. Whilst the film portrays a wild and rugged trek, the reality is the route often follows major highways. But its popularity ensures the availability of affordable hostels and stations where pilgrims' passports, proof of their journey, are stamped. Bill Bryson wrote about his attempt to hike the Appalachian Trail in 1998, offering gentle humour and exploration of travelling culture and nature in America. In 2015, Robert Redford produced and starred in a dramatised version of the same story. Additionally, many individuals have written books about trekking long-distance paths, whether as guidebooks or travel vlogs, particularly with the rise of social media. However, these narratives often focus on the practical aspects of the journey.
Come on. Can I get past? Come on. Come on. Come on then. I mean, you no harm. As you.
What's intriguing is the relative scarcity of narratives that delve into the core aspects of long-distance trekking, such as solitude and endurance, sense of achievement. The enduring question is why this particular type of adventure isn't more prominent in popular culture. In contrast, and a polar opposite, is the Instagram fad or generation, rushing around to have a selfie with the most grandest and remote location is, I believe, very fashionable. An online competition to get more likes than anyone else. Yet, despite its popularity, it's all very pretty, but contentless, a lot of fluff without meaning. Long-distance trails and the people doing them suggest there is something to talk about. Although light on glamour and fluff but big on narrative, there should be epic stories to be told. But they appear to be confined to books. I mean, perhaps it's the people who are drawn to these feats of endurance, in that they are interesting but more introvert and reserved. When I inquired about this subject with Tim, and why he's doing it, what is the story, Tim? His answer reflects a deeply personal motivation. I have always wanted to do it. His journey involves a significant amount of discomfort, yet it's marked by elation of completion, even on a daily basis. And obviously it's a profoundly personal experience, a quest that involves pushing one's limits and wrestling with the idea of giving up, especially when those challenges emerge on day 5. Long-distance trekking offers an opportunity to experience solitude, introspection, and a deep connection with nature, and it does allow for ample time for contemplation. Alternatively, it could just be perhaps a bizarre form of self-torture. While long-distance walking may not be a spotlight of popular culture, it is a unique adventure, a personal journey of growth and connection, and a challenge worth conquering. Motives for embarking on a long-distance trek are as diverse as the people who undertake such journeys. Tim quipped, because it was there. But looking back at my teens, my incentives were the adventure and the affordability it offered. Additionally, when I was planning to walk it, I loved the idea of planning and logistics. I would indulge in fantasy shopping through the Black's catalogue, dreaming of the best equipment, the perfect tent, the sleeping bag, the camping gadgets, the dehydrated foods. In reality, my budget couldn't quite stretch to accommodate all my desires. It was during the 1970s that a new material, Gore-Tex, emerged, putting an end to hiking in the rain and getting soaked on the inside of my nylon cagoule. The price then was similar today, about £200, or more like $400 in today's money, except back then I earned £5 a day from a Saturday job. Despite the unaffordability of this space-age material, and yes, everything in the 1970s was space-age, I did manage to afford a space blanket. Dehydrated camping foods were also becoming more widely available, often just variations of brown chunks of soya, already bred with added Marvel milk powder. British Army rations were a more affordable option, and were sometimes exchanged among hikers on a kind of underground black market. I'm guessing they were out of date, given the chocolate typically had a greyish colour. I have vivid memories of biscuits, humorously referred to as manhole covers, topped with jam and condensed milk squeezed from toothpaste tubes. Failing those options, noodle and pasta mills were becoming available in village shops, along with staples like corned beef and, of course, beans, and not forgetting a diet of Mars bars. During the 1970s and 80s, it was possible to hike the Pennine Way while exclusively staying in youth hostels, significantly reducing the amount of kit to be carried. These hostels provided cooking facilities, shelter, and a small grocery store, where one could stock up on items like Mars bars and Kendal mint cake. The latter, although obviously vile to my more mature taste buds, may have been a favourite in my youth.
Okay.
Now, in the end, personally, I found other activities that satisfied my need for planning and working out logistics, such as organising raves and festivals, and now going off and doing film shoots. At Greenhead, the Pennine Way merges with the east-west long-distance path of Hadrian's Wall, a short 10-mile hike that covers the most spectacular section of the route as it follows the Windsill, a range of volcanic cliffs. These cliffs were visible to the south at high force, appearing like a layer of jam between sedimentary rocks of the Pennines above. Tim managed to film the iconic Robin Hood's tree just a few weeks before it was felled, in a late-night act of cultural and actual vandalism. During my childhood, at the ages of 8 and my brothers at 10, we had our first experience of proper walking with the family along this very stretch of Hadrian's Wall, staying in then the purpose-built youth hostel of Once Brood. That's where our dad comes in. That's him on this iconic stretch of wall. As Philip Larkin waxed poetically, your mum and dad, they fuck you up. But they also pass on some good. Our holidays of hosteling, visiting ancient sites, and hiking have evidently influenced my passions. His ashes are spread at the Roman frontier fort of Chew Green, which is a couple of days' hike from here on the Pennine Way. Our mother's ashes have yet to be spread to join him, and it would have made a poignant tale if Tim had remembered to bring ashes. We could have both had our own version of the film The Way. To Tim's credit, he didn't take any days off, even though the Hadrian Wall section of 10 miles was relaxed and the weather was good. This was partly because I couldn't spare more than 2 weeks for the hike as support, and also because there's only a limited amount of time I wanted to spend with my brother. In the end, it worked in Tim's favour, helping to maintain a steady pace. While travelling with a group might allow for more leisurely enjoyment of the hike, bonding and sharing the experience, as well as taking breaks to wash or at least dry clothes out. A rest day wasn't necessary. And in Tim's word, it might have disrupted the rhythm of being in the zone. Whilst the Pennine Way does see plenty of day trippers covering sections of it, the number of endurance walkers is a fraction of what it once was during its heyday. I wonder why people have fallen out of love with what was once the premier long-distance walk. The path has decayed in places, signs have rotted away, and the youth hostels along the route have closed. Convenient village shops to stock up on supplies are also no longer available. Certainly, the availability of cheap air travel has allowed working-class people, particularly around Manchester and Sheffield, to explore more exotic destinations over the past 40 years, seeking adventure abroad. But as people have grown tired of beach holidays, they are now seeking active rather than passive experiences. The other Alfred Wainwright endurance walk, the Coast to Coast, recently granted a long-distance walking status, has become popular. An infrastructure of campsites, private hostels and a Sherpa services have grown up around it. As for the landscape, the coast-to-coast trail that spans Yorkshire Moors, Yorkshire Dales and the Lake District seems to outshine the Pennine Way, and covering just 200 miles, it can be achieved in a 2-week period. If we were to gauge the popularity of hiking based on boot sales, there has been a significant uptick in popularity. Visitors' numbers have increased in parts of the Pennine Way over recent decades. However, my unscientific survey over 2 weeks of waiting for Tim at key points along the route in August suggests that the number of through walkers, as opposed to section walkers, is quite small. Tim, over his 2-week period, passed less than a dozen other long-distance trekkers, either joining him on the route or heading in the opposite direction. So, yeah, when did Britain fall out of love with the Pennine Way? And, importantly, why? This section of the trail, north of Hadrian's Wall, takes you up through what was once a borderland between independent Scotland and England. It was a lawless zone inhabited by reivers. These were clans of rustlers, brigands, smugglers, and whisky distillers between the 13th and 18th centuries. The farmsteads were fortified, not only as a form of defence against each other, but also against the authorities. Shoe Green Roman Fort was originally a marching camp when Rome first invaded Scotland, and then later it evolved into a service and supply station along Deer Street. The Pennine Way follows the Roman road, and a little further on there's a mountain bothy. It's essentially a shed where he can get to experience the joys of the way before his final day, making his way around the granite Cheviot Mountains. As one descends from the mountains and across the border into Scotland, heading down to Co.AG, the journey is complete. Tim has covered 268 miles, a bit more because he got lost, over 14 days, traversing through mud and bog, and all in an unseasonably wet August. There's no grand welcome, no particular recognition of the achievement. However, the local pub still offers a complimentary half-pint of beer for those who complete the trail. This is in contrast to the Camino de Santiago, where you receive a certificate and have your passport finally stamped. On the Pennine Way, the achievement is a personal one, a journey of self-discovery and accomplishment.
There you are. Cheers now.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Tim, so how was it?
Tough.
And the sense of achievement?
Yeah, but that'd come later.
And the next trail you're going to do?
Oh, I'll give it a rest for a while.
So, I hope you enjoyed this video. Do like, comment and subscribe.